as with the first lecture, but not the second, I've embedded all of these videos on my website with the Russian text and translation below them, and also with links to files where you can download the complete text of these commercials in English or Russian in a docx format or PDF. And Sasha just put this link in the chat just now. So if you're concerned about being able to follow along, I'm going to assume that the videos are working in real time because they've been working that way. So I'm not going to ask you to, watch offline while I'm showing this stuff. But if you want to be able to follow what's being said by reading, then that would be the way to do it. So follow that link. All right, great. So here we are, we're talking about advertising, and one of the big concepts in advertising that I think we've all dealt with at some point or another is bait and switch, right? They promise you one thing and they give you another. So there's a little bit of bait and switch in this lecture. There's definitely Snickers. There's lots of Snickers in this lecture. But I also see this lecture as doing a couple other things. That this is also the food commercial lecture, the introduction of bringing certain types of food to people's attention in Russia through television commercials. So I'm going to actually show a few different commercials that are not Snickers before I show Snickers. I hope there are no Snickers purists out here who are just horrified by the idea of anything not being Snickers, but I think they'll be good for context. Now, once we get to advertising food, it's an interesting niche in terms of television advertising as it really starts to take off, because this is advertising presumably to the widest possible market, right? I mean, granted, if you're dirt poor, you can't afford these things most of the time, but maybe you can afford it some of the time, and everybody does have to eat. In that way, it's also very different from the Soviet era commercials we saw, where what's being advertised was something you can't get and might not even want to get, or just is completely unrealistic. We're really dealing with products that could be in people's homes and people's stomachs. The other aspect of today's lecture is this is also just by sheer chronology, this will be our intro to the 1990s. There's going to be more 1990s, but 1990s is, of course, a great, fascinating period for commercials in the Russian Federation. And as we move throughout the 1990s, we're going to go back and forth in today's lecture. We're going to see a couple things happening. We're going to see a sharp increase in production values. That is, in the early 90s, you look at a Russian TV commercial and you can immediately see that it was not made the way the commercials would be made, say, in the US or in Western Europe. By the end of the 90s, you can't do that because the production values are basically the same. Similarly, though in a less stark fashion, the level of sheer tackiness is going to drop. That is, the incredibly outrageous and really just sort of poor taste of the early 90s commercials will start to fade away as the commercial industry gets a bit more sophisticated. Another thing that's different about the stuff we're seeing today from the stuff we saw in the previous lectures is something that you can see if you actually look at the comments on YouTube, because all of these are from YouTube. For the previous stuff, most of the time, even Russian commentators on these commercials were seeing these commercials for the first time. They had very limited exposure. In the case of the last lecture, a lot of them were just in Estonia or even in Estonian. And then also most of the people on YouTube who were watching it were too young to have seen it. So everybody on the internet more or less is seeing this stuff for the first time. But when we get to the material for today, it's completely different. Now, what you see, particularly if you look at the comments on YouTube, is a huge nostalgia factor. And now it's like it was for my generation growing up in the United States, when we can all recite the same commercial from the 1970s, right? These are our touchstones. They're like internet memes. And so you see the comments on here, oh, I remember this commercial. I haven't seen this commercial in years. And this strange affection that we can have for a really annoying earworm that was on TV for many, many years. So people are seeing these commercials again rather than for the first time. And I must admit, for me, it was also total nostalgia. I was desperate to find a couple commercials that were stuck in my head for ages, and that also really demonstrated a thing I talked about before, which is the strange evolution of Russian intonation on commercials. So there are two that I wish I had, but I still remember something about them. One was for a company called Imartvidya. And I'm not even sure exactly what Imartvidya did. If it made videos, if it sold videos, it had something to do with videos. And it was Imartvidya International. And the commercial was a male voice. They didn't even have people on it. It was just a text. And a male voice and a female voice going on about Imartvidya with greater and greater passion. Imartvidya, Imartvidya. Я хочу только Imartvidya, Imartvidya. international. And it was so, and obviously it's stuck in my head. Or also a commercial for a movie, I believe, I don't know where the movie was from, I don't think it was Russian. The movie was called Любовь и магия, Love and Magic. And the tagline, which I saw again and again in 1992, I think, was Любовь и магия. Зло никогда не было таким сексуальным. Love and magic. Evil has never been so sexy. But again, the intonation struck me as really kind of bizarre. And I still don't entirely know what to make of these intonations. We're going to see some of it today. Another thing I couldn't find a perfect commercial for, but became a meme of its own in the 1990s was there were a great series of Twix commercials, but in describing Twix, you can all picture Twix, right? You know, the two sticks of whatever and chocolate. The phrase used for them was "sladkaya porочка." A sweet pair, but it's also kind of like lovebirds. And so there are all these jokes about the sladkaya porочка. And anytime you saw two people, like you could make fun of two world leaders together, oh, sladkaya porочка. Again, I couldn't find a perfect commercial for that. So the first commercial I want to show you, and I didn't bother giving a translation because the text is mostly nonsense. Talks about that trickster guy Boomer, is for a chewing gum called Boomer, which people of the right age might remember very, very well. And it's sort of a typical early post-Soviet commercial. And let's watch it now. Okay.
Теперь и у нас есть супер жвачка Бумер. Бум-бум-бум-бум-бум-бум-бумер. Бум-бум-бум-бум-бум-бум-бумер. Вечный проказник Бум-бум-бум-бум-бум-бумер. Сильный и ловкий Бум-бум-бум-бум-бум-бумер. Лежишь как покер, пока не устанешь. Ты супер жвачку Бумер. Бумер, это супер.
So what's great about this is how terrible it is, right? Their text that we don't really need to know about it. The production, it reminds me of 1970s Sid and Marty Krofft cartoons. It's just really awful. And also it's aggressively fast and upbeat in this way that I think was how the makers understood what Western advertising was about. And so one of the things that made these early ads even more annoying than ads generally are is how over the top they went in that particular direction. And this was a commercial aimed at kids, so kids picked it up, and for a while you could hear everybody going boom, 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 even as they hated it. I don't remember any adults who liked this commercial, but I don't remember any adults who didn't know this commercial at the time either, which I think for many of us is a familiar phenomenon. One of the big food phenomena that started in the 1990s and also became a set of memes is Uncle Ben's. We're all familiar, I think, with Uncle Ben's, who's now, I think, did it change its name? I was changing its image or something like that because of a slight racism problem. So Uncle Ben's introduces a whole line of foods, right? Uncle Ben's is not just rice, it's all sorts of things, a whole line of foods in Russia. And it's trying to fill an interesting niche here. So I'm going to show you one. There's so many Uncle Ben's commercials for their Basquez sauce, and then we'll talk about it. From 1994.
Приготовлю-ка сегодня на ужин что-нибудь необычное из французской кухни. Беру соус Баскес Uncle Ben's, предварительно порезав, слегка поджариваю мясо или куриное филе, добавляю соус, томаты, кабачки, цукини, сладкий перец и лук. Объеденье. Последний штрих. Картофельное пюре Uncle Ben's или рис Uncle Ben's в качестве гарнира. И всего за пару минут готово вкуснейшее блюдо. Uncle Ben's – неизменно превосходный результат.
Every commercial ended with Uncle Ben's, неизменно превосходный результат. You know, always a perfect result. Now, this one, the intonation I find interesting in that it seems to me very close to sort of советское восторженное, like that sort of upbeat, yes, we're semi-official intonation, but with a little something extra to it that sounds a little too enthusiastic over Uncle Ben's, but also that they're trying to open up an entire set of niches here in the market that I don't think really existed that so much, right? For instance, just getting you to buy a sauce, right? There were a few sauces people bought, but getting to buy a sauce that has a flavor and maybe a bit of a kick to it is a welcome thing from my point of view for Russian cuisine, but something that wasn't exactly mainstreamed. But also even more than that, at the end, she talks about using Uncle Ben's rice or mashed potatoes as a garni, or here in this case, sort of a bed for it, but usually a side. And if you think about going from Soviet times to this, it should have been a hard sell to pay extra money for a box of something that you're used to making yourself pretty easily. I mean, the rice might be a little quicker, but you know, if you cooked, you probably made rice. And buying mashed potatoes, which is never going to be good as mashing your own potatoes. So this is there is something of a bit of a hard sell in it. The upshot, though, is Uncle Ben's, through sheer ubiquity, becomes a big part of the conversation in the 90s. At one point, I wish I'd kept this article. In an article about when I was doing research on MMM, the pyramid scheme, someone referred to a supposed scientific study, but was known about as the Uncle Ben's effect. That is, when the Uncle Ben's commercial came on, children throughout the former Soviet Union who were watching it would start to vomit and have seizures, which I doubt, but I like the story. And that someone bothered to come up with an urban legend about Uncle Ben's, I think says something about the ubiquity. All right, skipping ahead to 1998, and then I promise you, after that and one more, we'll get to Snickers. One of my favorites from when Fran and I lived in Moscow, for Nescafe. Now, Nescafe coffee. So coffee is a big deal, right? Because coffee was hard by the 80s and early 90s. It was hard to get good coffee, and you were very aware whether you're getting Arabica beans or Robusta beans and so on and so forth. So there was a real need for coffee, and also still, everybody was serving you instant coffee as this kind of wonderful thing, which never really was. So Nescafe is in there, and we have this commercial, which is interesting in that, you know, remember in the old Soviet commercials, sometimes they were about nothing to do with the product, like when they're throwing grapefruits at those aerobics women. But there's also a long Western tradition about the commercials having nothing to do with the products either. In those commercials, those Western commercials are usually selling a lifestyle, or associating a lifestyle with a product, and therefore, if you are connected to the product yourself, then you can partake in the lifestyle. And this one, I think, fits in that category quite well. So it's Nescafe commercial from 1998. And again, all these texts are on my website.
Петя, не вздумай говорить с девушками о компьютерах.
Одевайся стильно, Петь.
Они любят, чтобы мы почитали стихи.
И так ненавязчиво ее пригласи на чашечку кофе. Им это нравится, поверь мне. Алло? Петя, это тебя. Тебя девушка.
Девушка. Брат, если это Ася, Лиза или Наташа, то меня нет. А если это Катя или Марина, то я возьму. Это Ангелина.
So nothing about Nescafe there except have a cup of coffee, and you know, here's the Nescafe coffee. But what we do have is young men, practically teens, I guess teens, hanging out, giving each other advice. It's sort of this whole bro thing, right? And it's all about getting girls. And you have the one who is somehow marked by the group as the biggest nerd. Don't talk about computers. And when we see him from behind, he just looks kind of ordinary. And then once the phone rings and it's girls for him, all of a sudden he looks much more charming. And he's very aware of what he's doing. And he is the master of all of this, to such an extent that he's rattling off all these girls' names, and only a couple see, and it's someone else completely, Angelina, which, you know, I guess was maybe an exotic name because of Angelina Jolie or something. But somehow, in that weird commercial way, the magic of this nerd who turns out not to be such a nerd, being phoned by all these hot chicks, is connected to why you would want Nescafe. And to try to make it a direct correlation, of course, never really works. I remember in the 80s, my Russian roommate in Leningrad looking at Western magazines saying, okay, so what this is saying here is that if I buy this, I'll be just as good looking as this person here. I was like, well, yeah, but not exactly, right? It's not that primitive. Somehow, I think through the sheer, again, repetition and ubiquity, you're just going to like something. The hope is you're going to like something about this brand and want to associate yourself with it. Also, I'm pointing out that, and you know, we're going to look at other things that are targeted at women. And we saw that with Uncle Ben's. There's an interesting thing going on with targeting young men as consumers in groups, showing them to have this sort of relaxed friendship and giving this sense of these products that can help you like be a happy, successful guy among guys. That's going to be a real key for Snickers. All right. Last one's completely different. I'm showing this one as, this is a commercial that I think is actually a reaction to everything we've been watching. Of course, everything's happening simultaneously. You have Snickers, you have all these ridiculous over-the-top ads, and then you have this, a commercial for a milk, a series of milk products that some of you might remember, Mila and Mila. It's not around anymore. But this is when we see the rise of Slavic kitsch to sell stuff. Okay, so this is around 1998.
Милая, мила, синий ходила, ой, люли, люли, синий ходила, буренку доила, ой, люли, люли, буренку доила, всю семью кормила, ой, люли, люли, всю семью кормила, молоком поила, ой, люли, люли.
Милая Мила, молоко от чистого сердца.
So this song was in my head for years. But what my favorite thing about it, of course, is that we assume that Mila is feeding her whole family because she gets up early like a good Russian woman and milks the cow. But before that, she spends clearly over half an hour getting her makeup just perfect, because you really want to have perfect makeup for cow milking. And so there's this over the top idealization of this kind of traditional peasant life. I mean, at some point, by the time they get back into the hut, every moment could be on some sort of Pollock box or something like that. It's, again, you might think that it would be hard to take this ad seriously because it's so obvious what it's doing, right? It's so clearly exploiting a particular type of kitsch, and there's going to be lots of Western brands that will do the exact same thing and make themselves Russian. But this is where the YouTube comments come in that I find particularly interesting. So among the very first YouTube comments, we're just going to look at two of them. One says, "Не знаю почему, но у меня сейчас точно такое же ощущение от этой рекламы, как и 15 лет назад. Мурашки по коже, душевно, как исконно по-русски. Действительно, шедевральная народная реклама." I don't know why, but I have the same feeling I had from this commercial 15 years ago. Like I like my goosebumps on my skin. It's so soulful. It's so truly Russian. It's truly a chef-d'oeuvre of the national commercials. Then another, такого молока уже давно нет, ностальгия, чисто русская реклама, побольше бы таких сейчас. We haven't had milk like this for a long time. Nostalgia, such a purely Russian commercial. We could, if only we could have more of these right now. And just the idea of having a purely Russian commercial shows how far we've come, right? That you could say that without irony. And of course it makes sense. It's been decades. But this is a moment when, the marketers target people in a certain way and they hit, clearly, at least some people, it really, really worked for. Okay, so enough of the bait and switch. We're going to go to Snickers. And Snickers, as I said, is one of the things that Mila Mila, I think, is a reaction to. Snickers in the 1990s was a symbol of the foreign invasion of products and also foreign invasion of cultures. You'd see people talking about a Snickerization of Russia, right? Because Snickers stood in really well because you could find it everywhere. It was so obviously not Russian, but also just really, really appealing. It was really, really good and available. And so I could imagine if you had an attitude like where you really resent all this stuff coming in, it would be the sort of thing like, God, I can't stand all the Snickers here. Let me buy another Snickers because they're really kind of tasty, right? So for whatever reason, Snickers, maybe the ubiquity of the commercial, Snickers stands in for all of this stuff. And even here, though, it's kind of funny because, as Tanya and I were talking about at the very beginning, peanut butter never has taken off in Russia. Not that it should, but it hasn't. And peanuts in general have never been like a big part of the Russian diet. So you wouldn't necessarily expect peanuts to really take off. But there's something about both the way the Snickers are made and the way the Snickers are sold that made Snickers quite successful. So Snickers, in its ad campaign, unsurprisingly, if you've ever seen a Snickers commercial anywhere, is going to emphasize being active, being young, being hip, being cool. And this is not unique to Snickers, but there's a question of its timing. And it also fits in, everybody kind of wanted that part of the market, right? Because people often want the young people presumably with disposable income or future disposable income, the people who are aspiring to something. So brands will make themselves seem hip. This connection between this idea of bringing hipness to Russia was not exclusive to bringing Russian products. You may remember this commercial, one of the commercials I hate the most, from 1989, a Pepsi commercial about glasnost, which is subtitled here.
Not very long ago, America introduced Pepsi to the Soviet Union. And while it may be just a coincidence, a lot of refreshing changes have taken place ever since. Pepsi, a generation ahead.
This could not be more obnoxious. Like I in particular, the notion that maybe a coincidence, but ever since Pepsi came to Russia or the Soviet Union, which they say changes have happened. Pepsi came to the Soviet Union in 1974. That is basically a lifetime of Pepsi drinkers, and it was terrible too. It was warm, but it was around. If Pepsi was what brought down the Soviet Union, it sure took its sweet time doing it. And in fact, there's really no way that you can, of all the Western products that you could try to associate with change in the Soviet Union, Russia, Pepsi would be the last of them because it was the only one you could have for so long. But that didn't stop them. In a much less dishonest way, I think that kind of niche is being sought after by other companies coming to Russia, in particular by Snickers. Now, when Snickers comes to Russia, Snickers has been around a long time, of course, and Snickers has long been an international brand. For a long time in the UK, it was sold as Marathon, and then it took on the name Snickers in the 70s, so it's Snickers everywhere now. It was named after someone's horse in this rich family. So as with a lot of other companies, Snickers had an approach that generally worked for them, which was they'd come up with an ad campaign and they would adapt it to different countries with localized content, but basically a version of the same slogan. Again, they're not the only people to do this. Around the same time in the 1990s, remember Gillette razors was very big, and the big slogan in America was this tune, "Gillette's the best a man can get." And in Russian, it worked out perfectly to translate. It became Gillette лучше для мужчины нет, except that the prosody was bad. It was Gillette лучше для мужчины нет, like there's nothing better for a man. There's always a problem with this localization. But the upshot is the first Snickers commercials are basically just going to be variations on international Snickers commercials. And the first one I'm going to show you barely has any adaptation for Russia at all. There's going to be a guy talking about what Snickers are. I didn't bother to translate it because you all know what Snickers are, and talking about how Snickers really helps you fight hunger, which is the big theme, obviously. I mean, if you've seen Snickers commercial. So, 1992.
Если вы проголодались, Snickers. Snickers — батончик из молочного шоколада, жареный арахис и мягкая карамель. Snickers — это лучший способ утолить голод. Snickers.
So that's just an American commercial with a Russian voiceover and some Russian text at the end, which you could not do nowadays. But in the early 90s, you could, and also because so much of the entertainment production we'd be watching on TV would work the same way. We're all familiar, I think, with all of these Western movies with one person's droning voice translating all of the voices, right? So this would not stand out. But it's not a long-term strategy. If a company's going to invest in the market, they're actually going to have to truly localize their campaigns. But here already they do get people's attention with this idea that there's something about Snickers that really fights hunger. And I was fascinated to read things in the newspapers at the time, people asking questions like, what makes Snickers so good for you? What makes it so nutritious and so healthy? Because something about the way they were marketing it stood out. I mean, it never occurred to me to think of Snickers as healthy, but it has lots of calories and I guess does have protein. But it's not the way that candy had been considered before. And at the end, they have a Russian slogan here, which is "Snickers и вы в полном порядке." Полном порядке. So Snickers and you're just fine. Notice the formal "вы" here, you. right? That's going to go away. Snickers is going to, from here on, Snickers is not going to be talking to vam. Snickers is going to be talking to тебе, ты. It's going to be deliberately quite impersonal, quite personal. Snickers is going to have a one-to-one connection to you, like a Protestant and Jesus. Snickers is going to, but at the same time, it's going to address everybody as you, singular, ты. In a sense that we're all kind of connected in this group informal connection to Snickers. It's all of us guys together, and I do mean guys. Though there is, I suppose, one exception to the guy focus here. I'm going to show you another from the 90s.
Думаешь, это безумная смесь? Попробуй сникерс с семечками. Новый сникерс Mad Mix. Сникерсни без шелухи.
And actually, so this is all about dancing babushki, but I would submit that this still makes it is in no way in conflict with a group of just us guys, because the humor of dancing old ladies and old ladies behaving not as they should be, I don't think here is addressed at old ladies or young ladies. It's a kind of adolescent, often adolescent male. It fits in with a certain type of humor here. So it certainly, it doesn't seem like it's trying to corner the babushka market here for Snickers. Around this time, we get Snickers' most ubiquitous Russian slogan, which many of you know, I think, "Не тормози, сникерсни." Okay, so "не тормози," tormos is a brake. It's also a slang term for someone who's a bit slow, right? So don't put on the brakes, right? So if you're like, don't drag around, snickersni. Now, snickersni is not, or was not, a word. It's an amazing feat of chutzpah for this company to come into Russia and not just make Russian ads, but invent an entire Russian verb in the imperative, snickersni, right? And it's commanding you to do something, but there's something kind of proleptic about this, is anticipating knowledge that you don't have yet, which is, you can't possibly know what snickersni means until you've watched enough of these commercials and eaten enough Snickers. So you're kind of learning it on the go, but initially it's just nonsense, and mostly it's just nonsense. But on the other hand, it's kind of pure nonsense, right? Just go out and do the Snickers, be Snickers. And this is so ubiquitous that in the 90s, at least, I think it would be impossible to be in a group of people who speak Russian, who lived in Russia, for one person, for whatever reason, to say "не тормози," and for other people not to immediately respond "snickersni." This is just a conditioned reflex. And also it's a weird verb too. It has a weird rhythm to it, almost like it has that English double stress that you're not supposed to have in Russian except in compound acronyms. But it's not a very easy word, but it's kind of funny. It turns out there is an English word, snickersni, which I only learned from Russian articles about Snickers. Snickersni is a kind of fencing blade. I doubt that's where it comes from, and I can't imagine many people know what a snickersni is. It's probably a coincidence. But the upshot is this total nonsense verb that everybody ends up knowing. And this is all in the service of the general message of Snickers, which is that it's giving you energy. So you can go, you are not going to drag around, you're going to snickersmoots, and you're going to have the energy to be basically a good modern subject of a modern capitalist world. Go out there and do stuff, right? Okay. And it's always snickersni, right? I mentioned that when we go from вы to ты, from the plural formal to the informal singular, it's really hard for me to imagine a situation in which someone would say snickersните. Присаживайтесь, будьте как дома, сникерсните. No, this is just not going to happen. I feel it's more like if you're addressing an entire platoon of soldiers in Russian, you'll still use the singular imperative, because you're not talking to them as a group of people. You're talking to them as a sort of one person, and not in any kind of formal way. So I think Snickers, the person who is given the command snickersni, is both an individual but also part of a big social body that is healthy and active because it eats Snickers. And that healthy, active, collective social body is the subject of so many of these commercials. All right, so jumping ahead, now we just have a few interesting Snickers commercials. Jumping ahead, we have one for almond Snickers around 2013, where we also happen to get soft-pedaled racism through funny accent humor. the humor here does not translate, but you can look at the text. So here we go.
Быстрей, быстрей! Это что такое?
Двигай шаровары, папаша. О, орешки.
Мое!
Эй, ты чего творишь? Скорее сникерс миндаль кушай. Луча.
Лучше. Пошел вон! Быстрей, быстрей!
Не ожидай? Новый сникерс миндаль.
Не ожидай, новый Snickers миндаль. And the way he says, he has this, I can't quite describe the kind of jolly, humorous way he says "не ожидай," which is very much in this tradition of this kind of minstrelsy, speaking of this, of how people understand someone speaks with a foreign accent. This is part of an international campaign. You may have seen versions of this in English, where you see someone who's behaving badly, who's upset, and you give them a Snickers, like they're basically a baby having a tantrum. You give them a Snickers, and they turn back into themselves. Interestingly, in all the ones I've seen, if there's a woman in there who's involved in it, the woman is the before Snickers person. Like you're basically acting like this, pardon me, angry bitch. And you get the Snickers, and you're back to being a normal guy. So the sex change here is actually a pretty common motif. So for several years now, we've had this lucha, like better thing where Snickers transforms you by bringing out your real self that has been submerged by this angry, unhappy person. We get to a point where Snickers has been around so long, and all this has been around so long, that it can, even as it's been staking out this territory for being really modern, being really hip and all that, it can also dip its toe into Snickers as a way of kind of preserving a sort of idealized Russianness. So there's several commercials for Snickers with sunflower seeds. Now sunflower seeds are, or seeds of some sort, but sunflower seeds, maybe they're not, I don't know, seeds, but sunflower seeds, for those who don't know, are sort of a traditional peasant thing that you would eat in Russia. You take the seed, chew on it, spit it out. It's lovely. And so the thing about sunflower seeds, though, is if you're talking about a traditional Russian snack, it would be sunflower seeds, not Snickers. So here we have this commercial from 2014. Which is called Tfu na golod. I call it nuts to hunger just as the pun, but it's really, I spit on hunger basically. All right, here we go. There are almost no words.
Лучше. Новый сникерс с семечками. Тьфу на голову.
So somehow, Western Snickers with seeds puts you back in touch with your Russian roots, complete with Russian garb. This is a weird claim on a kind of Russification, but also, sorry about that. Yeah, never mind. It's just it's a complete, oh yeah, it's a reversal of the really common trope you'd see, including in Snickers ads, where you have someone, and we had that in the Pepsi ad too, someone who's really uncool, right? And then you give them the cool thing, and they become hip and cool. And here, Snickers is the remedy against this excessive, stupid coolness, so you can just be one of the guys. And it's telling, I think, that the guy who first is Lucha has this voice that seems to come from like the depths of the earth, as a sort of authoritative thing here. All right. So, okay. Place here. Oh, and also, not to put too fine a point on it, this is 2014. And if you're going to pick a year when a Western company is going to try to play up its Russianness after, Maidan and everything, it might not be a bad time for it. Okay. 2 more commercials. This one I think of as their kind of Marvel movie commercial. It's pretty self-explanatory.
Дикий. Человек приуныл. Женщина, ой, все. И ой, все, собака. Встречайте этим летом во всех...
Парни, вы чё? Съешьте сникерс. Лучше? Лучше.
А кто ты, когда голоден? Ищи свой сникерс во всех магазинах страны.
So first off, we've seen a lot of the commercials. It's not just that you just eat Snickers. You do this in this kind of determined gesture. You know, you're gonna just tear right into that Snickers and you become a normal person. So they start out as these kind of parody superheroes, wild man, emo guy, and talk to the hand lass, and with talk to the hand dog basically, and they get this, and it's all in this parody of a commercial coming soon to theaters in the summer, but instead they eat their Snickers and they just get back to being normal guys. So in a way too, Snickers is also a cure for the excess of pop culture. I mean, I think it's pushing it, but still, towards any kind of excess, towards anything that is causing a disequilibrium in your sense of self and your ability to function out there in the world with the rest of the guys, to the point where you're even becoming not just a girl, but a really but the девушка и всё, right? So if you take the Snickers, then you're gonna be okay. Who are you when you're hungry? Is a international Snickers campaign, along with you in Russian. You're not you when you're hungry. So again, hunger becomes this thing that is threatening to your sense of self. Hunger is a thing that must be controlled, disciplined through the fun of Snickers, and then you can be kind of reincorporated into the world around you. All right, last one from this year. Snickers has been in Russia for 30 years. Happy birthday, Snickers. And so Snickers marks this with its anniversary commercial. Basically, you've come a long way, Snickers. So here we go.
Коллеги, меня видно? Меня слышно? Отличный комментарий, будем работать. Лучше? Лучше.
Сникерс. 30 лет за любой движ. Побеждай голод и выигрывай призы. Не тормози. Сникерс не.
So this one has a lot going on. The 1991 thing is the over-the-top hair and fashions is kind of like the excessive over-the-top hair and fashions you'd have in early commercials that are trying to show that they're hip and Western. But in the beginning there, it's telling that on the one hand, you have the guy who's trying to boil his jeans, which I guess is like a way of making acid wash jeans, and the other guy who's basically trying to make cabbage soup. And it comes together, you know, one of the best series of commercials from the 1970s was for Reese's peanut butter cup, where someone was going around holding chocolate, someone's going around holding peanut butter, they run into each other. You got peanut butter in my chocolate, you got chocolate in my peanut butter. That's not what's happening here. You got cabbage on my jeans, you got jeans on my cabbage, let's have cabbage jeans. No. What's happening here is these two things should not be together. They should not be in the same pot. And that's also, I think, very emblematic of early 1990s, everything being kind of mixed together, like in the like what they're saying in the babushki dancing commercial. You think this is a crazy combo. Well, here is a really crazy combo. And as one article I read about it pointed out, there's something also going on here with cabbage, kapusta, and money, you know. So early on, they're just basically trying to figure things out, and Snickers is there at the rescue to cover over everything. Why even have your cabbage soup when you can have a Snickers, which is actually very hard for me to argue against. And so that's in the first scene. And then in the next one in 2021, everybody looks completely different. And now you have people running because, of course, one huge difference in the past 30 years is a fitness craze, right? Something I would never predict in the 1990s that fitness would be big in Russia, because eventually it would be, but it certainly wasn't early on. So the fitness, the movement for fitness actually fits very well with what Snickers is supposed to do for you. It'll give you the energy to run. And now the problem is not being this these poor dweebs who have to use one pot for both their jeans and their cabbage, but being this this obsessive, this work obsessed I guess kind of office plankton, but not in the office guy who's, actually working remotely. So that's kind of contemporary, who can't even get off the treadmill of his work to run with the other guy. So he combines the two. He's running as if he's still on his work treadmill where he's got his computer and he's talking to people and he's mouthing all of these buzzwords. And in a way, you could see him as the apotheosis of the certain notion of like a Western work obsession and all that. But he's in the wrong here. And he has to have his Snickers so that he can turn back into one of the guys. Strange things happen to his hair in this one. I'm not quite sure what's going on with his hair when it changes, but there you go. So now we're back to this very active lifestyle where it's about a balance. You have to learn when to leave the work behind and go out there and be again with the guys. Where are the women here? Nowhere I can find them. So summing up, 30 years is a long time. It's a long time for anything. It's a long time for a brand. And what happens to Snickers is Snickers remains both foreign in the positive ways, in that it's represents something like really good that people can like coming from somewhere else, and that Russia is not really making a version of. And in a way almost domesticated. It's been around so long that people under 35, 40 probably don't remember life without Snickers. And so this strategy in Russia is typical of a global brand strategy. The same clever motifs that work elsewhere can work there too, but there's a lot of attention to providing the right sort of details to make the product feel at home. But as with everything else, when we're talking particularly about the former Soviet Union, there's something about Snickers here that's different, I think, for Russia than for the places where it's been longer. And it has to do with the timing, right? Snickers is marketing itself as being a big part of an energetic, healthy male youth culture. And that's not different from what Snickers necessarily is in the West, but Snickers can't occupy a really important role in that idea space in the West because it's been around so long, and this whole notion of this particular type of consumer popular culture and fun and so on and so forth has been around long. So that Snickers isn't really a big part of that, necessarily an important part of that image for the West. But the arrival of Snickers in 1991, when everything is taking off, means that Snickers can actually market itself as playing a role in this modernization of your daily life and of your consumer culture. So the Mars company seized the opportunity to identify Snickers with young male athletic playfulness, with a sort of bro-ish camaraderie, with sports, and both with a Western orientation in terms of mass culture, but an appeal to Russianness when necessary. And of course, also over time, Western styles, Western entertainment, and so on and so forth, no longer necessarily gets marked as anti-Russian or non-Russian or unpatriotic. It's just global modern. And that's what Snickers wants to be. Snickers wants to be something that helps you be a global modern subject, at least if you're a guy. Ultimately, as Snickers becomes just a normal part of Russian commercial life, I think this is a story about how Russia learned to stop worrying and just Snickers. That's it. Thank you.
Chat is open and we can start taking questions.
Great. From Peter Rutland. Is this Chechen Snickers for real? I think I saw the one you're talking about, and I had so much trouble. I couldn't verify it, and I had so much trouble believing it was real that I left it out. It's the one that's like Snickers po-Kavkazski or something. Is that what you're talking about?
They are Chechen fighters, and there's a girl trying to make a gun work, and she eats a Snickers, and it starts working.
Yeah, I assume it. I assumed it's a parody. I didn't have enough time to figure out what's going on with it.
But I do remember during the Chechen wars, there were occasional stories of the fighters surviving by eating Snickers bars.
Oh, could be. But I think during the Chechen wars, bringing Chechens in a commercial would be, well, obviously in really bad taste and risky. My guess when I was watching this, and what would be good to do is go back and look at how many views it's gotten, is that it's a parody. I was hoping to find also the interesting Snickers parodies to show you, because there's lots of stuff that's a Snickers thing, but they're viewed by like 25 people. So I don't know about this one. I guess I feel like this one is in such bad taste that I can't believe even on post-Soviet television it aired, but I could be wrong. I encourage you all to take a look at it later though. I remember being in Leningrad in 1990, people seemed almost horrified I was drinking Pepsi out of a bottle and felt a serious faux pas. Yeah, probably. I just felt like the real faux pas was wanting your Pepsi with ice or cold or something, because it was always served at room temperature. And I'd explain to people who didn't like it. Well, yeah, of course you don't like it. It tastes terrible. It's fine. But of course, in Russia, you do not drink cold drinks because they'll freeze your insides or something. Snickers and alcohol was a common consumption pattern. Sure. It sounds good to me. Is that a question?
Yeah, I just remember standing behind people at kiosks, and the men would often buy a bottle of vodka and a couple of Snickers.
Yeah.
I wondered why they were both being sold in the kiosks so frequently, and I realized that was what was going on.
Oh, that's really interesting, actually, because I wonder if that has less to do with like Snickers and vodka go together than the things that sold well as stuff you could have in every kiosk because people are going to buy them. So I would imagine if you're selling Snickers and vodka in your kiosk, it's not necessarily because you think people are going to buy them together, but some people are going to buy Snickers and some people are going to buy vodka, and they're pretty reliable. And then in that Venn diagram, you're going to have people who are going to buy both of them. But your comment just brings home exactly how ubiquitous Snickers was. You did not have to, in Moscow at least, you did not have to go far to find a Snickers. They really just were everywhere, which I assume meant they were being sold, which I assume meant people liked them enough to buy them. And so what you have then, if you buy the marketing like this is going to help your hunger, this is going to give you energy, in the absence of things like protein bars and diet bars and all that, then it was a rare thing that you could have. It's packaged and then presumably safe and all of that you could eat on the street. And when you're done, you feel kind of full. So the convenience of it was probably significant.
Hi, thank you. This isn't really so much a question, I guess, as a comment. I was thinking back to the Uncle Ben's rice in 1994, 1995. And it's true that, of course, it's more convenient, and faster to use Uncle Ben's. But I also remember buying, Soviet/Russian rice at that time. And it came in a paper sack. And you had to rinse it multiple times, and then you had to pick the rocks out of it. And if you weren't careful with picking out the rocks, you would bite into the rocks, which I did. So in a way, it's not just like time convenient. It's also like an enormous labor saving and possible health sparing device.
You're absolutely right. Yeah.
And the other thing I was going to say is just about Snickers. There's this there's an ad for that I showed my Russian politics class, Nestle for Men, which shows this it's also like a mid-90s thing. It shows this, one of the guys who would be wearing the maroon jacket, outside of a store providing akhrana. It shows him trying to teach his girlfriend to drive, and she's all like, they have her all bimboed out, and she kind of can't figure out what she's doing. And he's about to lose his patience. And then he has this Nestle for Men. And he's like, oh, you just do this and you move the lever that way. And it basically says, if you eat Snickers for Men, it will enable you to have a conversation basically with any woman, no matter how stupid she is. So that's an interesting candy thing, maybe. Like you have some candy and then it enables you to, be a nicer, sort of be a nicer, less angry person.
Which also goes back to my feeling like it's about being a toddler too, right? I mean, like if your toddler's hungry, give them something to eat and they're probably going to feel better. Certainly anecdotally, I would remember Russian women saying, "Oh, голодный мужчина," you gotta feed the hungry man or he's just gonna lose it, right? Somehow hungry women are okay. The hungry men, it's a crisis. There was a question about what year Snickers ice cream bars introduced. I don't know, but I do know that in 1992 and 1983, I was buying them, which is not long after because they were so good. And I only remember it because at the store near where I was living, there was a store where there's a freezer that opened up. So if you're standing in front of the freezer to buy it, you could just open it up like this and reach in. There's a woman behind it. And so I was sort of out of my Russian zone, for instance, and sort of my Western consumer self. I go up there and I open it up and I just take out the frozen Snickers. And the woman behind us says, "Знаете, вообще я это делаю сама." And I just said to her, "Я уверен, что вы это делаете прекрасно." But it's like, oh, right, I'm not supposed to touch the Snickers. You're supposed to touch the Snickers and buy it. So that's how I remember that 1992, 1993, they did have frozen Snickers ice cream bars. And that's the first place I ever had them. They were just way too wonderful.
So we have a question from Dawn Van Adda. Any idea why the names of Three Musketeers and Milky Way are transposed in the former Soviet Union? How about the popularity of ice cream Snickers? Tromping around Krasnodar in 1993, it was a big deal for us displaced Moskvichi to find a freezer full of them.
So ice cream Snickers, anecdotally, I think were big. So you're saying that Milky Way and Three Musketeers were swapped? So that like they sold Three Musketeers as Milky Ways and Milky Ways as Three Musketeers? This is a scandal. I did not know this. And
as of whenever the heck it was, I was last in Tajikistan, which was 2 years ago, I think, they were still transposed.
Really?
For some reason, Three Musketeers are sold as some Milky Ways. Now I keep forgetting, but anyway, if you buy a Milky Way, you get a Three Musketeers and vice versa.
You know why I never knew that?
Standard to the Mars company or whoever makes those things, also in the former Soviet Union.
That's fascinating. I never knew that. I think because if I had those two and a Snickers in front of me, I'd always buy the Snickers. So I never would have found that out. But that's fascinating, and I can't think of any reason why anyone would bother to switch these two brands where neither of these names really tell you much about the food, except maybe Milky Way. Very odd. It's fascinating. If anyone finds out, I'd love to hear. Well, then if that's it, then next week will be oh wait. Hold on, a comment. Instant coffee. Oh yeah. Huh, interesting. Next week will be MMM, the most popular and scandalous pyramid scheme of the 1990s. It's an old favorite for me, and it worked. It's a pyramid scheme, but the secret to its success was its series of incredibly popular soap opera-based commercials about characters whom everybody got to know, even if they didn't like them very much. So MMM next week. The week after that,